I think if I had kept going in that particular environment, I think it would have broken me. Have you always wondered what it's like to work in an inpatient behavioral health hospital? I wish I had known what it was like before I started, so I'm making this video to help others know what to expect before they get started. If you're curious what it's like on the inside of a psychiatric hospital, follow along and let's go. I did want to give a trigger warning before I get too far into this video. This is going to include a frank discussion of people with severe mental health and trauma issues. It's also potentially going to include some discussion of self-harm. So if that's triggering for you, or if that's something that is upsetting, please click off now, because unfortunately that is part of the experience that I'm going to be sharing. If you need help, or if you are somebody, who feels like you are in a crisis yourself, please reach out to somebody that you trust. Please connect with your local hotline, whether it's for suicide prevention or just your local emergency line. Thank you for doing that. I hope that you feel well, but this video is really for people who are about to work in a place like this, not necessarily for those of you who may be experiencing a mental health crisis right now. So just letting you know, that's where we're gonna go. But I am going to promise you that I will be as respectful and kind as possible when talking about the clients that I served. All right, let's get to the experience. My name's Megan. If we haven't met yet, hello. I am a licensed clinical professional counselor. I'm in the state of Illinois. I graduated with my master's degree in creative arts therapy in, I think 2010, maybe? Pretty sure. It doesn't matter. I've been doing this for over 10 years, close to 15. Here we go. So my first job out of graduate school was in an inpatient behavioral health hospital. That is the nice way to say psych hospital. So yeah, where I was working was a hospital for kids. So it was everyone ages 2 all the way to 21. 2-year-olds were rare, but not unseen. There were a few in the time that I was there. And then anybody over 18 was usually somebody who had like a developmental disability or something like that. So that's why they were still in the like children and adolescent hospital. My position there was as a creative arts therapist. So I was there to, facilitate art and music and physical activity like yoga, dance, that kind of thing. It was kind of like, just recreation time, but it was also a little bit more elevated than that. Like I was supposed to be keeping out like a therapeutic eye for whatever we were doing. So the criteria for kids to get admitted to the hospital is that, they had to be those ages that I talked about, so 2 to 21. And then the person needed to be either a threat to themselves or to others. So, if they, let's say, were severely depressed and maybe not in a good mental state to be kind to their own body, or if they were having some sort of crisis and were just really aggressive towards the people around them. So those are the two kind of extremes. The other thing is they might have some sort of diagnosed disorder, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, depression, anxiety, or even like severe cases of autism where the kids were just not in control of their bodies, basically. Like they were not safe in their environment without additional support. The other reason that some of the kids there might have been admitted is if they had committed a crime of some sort, like usually a violent crime. but they were not mentally fit to stand trial or go before the judge. So maybe they didn't really understand their charges. They weren't fit to be in court and go to their juvenile detention center. So they would be in the psychiatric hospital getting therapy and getting their medications adjusted so that hopefully they would be able to eventually go to court, have their trial, and then have their time in detention so that they could move on with their lives. So those are kind of the different scenarios we're looking at as far as what I was doing there, who the population was, and all of that. Inside of the hospital, so what it kind of looked like was it was divided into different units. So there were 2 units for children, or 2, hallways for kids, ages 2 to 12. Usually those units were divided into like the younger kids, maybe up to like, 7 years old or so, 8 maybe. And then they would have the older kids on the other side. And that was purely just for safety reasons. As you can imagine, having like a 12-year-old in the same area as a 4-year-old, when they're both having like mental health crises, would probably not be great. So that was how that was separated. Then there were 2 units for adolescent boys and 2 units for adolescent girls. And that was just based on like biological sex. At that time, they were not really taking into consideration like gender identity or anything like that. I don't know how they handle that in present day, but I do know that back in 2011, 2010, like it was just based on your biological sex, not on how you identified. There also was a separate unit for patients who had like severe developmental delays and they needed extra support and attention and just extra care that couldn't really be given on the main units. So that adolescents, in addition to being divided by their biological sex, they were also divided according to like, I guess you could say like their behavior or their like reason for being admitted. So you would have, ideally, if we had like a high enough census, you would have one section for girls who were like depressed or sort of anxious or more on the end of like self-harm. And then you would have another unit for the girls who were maybe acting out in a more aggressive manner, and more of a danger to others. And then the same for the adolescent boys, like ages 13 to 21, like it was also divided that way, like the more aggressive behavioral issues versus like anxiety, depression, self-harm. Unfortunately though, there were times when the census was just low. So like, let's say around the holidays or sometimes during summer, because, the kids are out and about in the community. They're not at school where these behaviors are being, reported. We would have a lower census. And so sometimes these groups would be together. And so you'd have like a super depressed, withdrawn boy with maybe a bunch of guys who were super angry and like loud. Obviously that's not very therapeutic for anyone, and it was really sad to see. But I will say that the staff on the units did their best to sort of protect the kids who needed protecting. And while I was there, there were never any like major, incidents with harm or things like that. But it was just always a little like tense, if you know what I mean. So that's sort of the layout of how everyone was divided up. I would say that probably the most surprising thing to me while I worked there was that there actually were occasionally very young toddlers there, like 2-3 years old. I remember coming to work one day and looking at the census and seeing a kid who was 3 on there. And then going to the unit to run my group and seeing this little boy running around with like a pacifier in his mouth and a blankie. And they had like a pack and play set up for him in the nurse's station for when he needed a nap. Like, this was no place for a toddler, especially as a mom now. Like, thinking about that is really heartbreaking. Just knowing like the amount of trauma and challenge that this kid was facing, that some authority thought it was appropriate to put him in a mental hospital. Like, pardon the phrase, I know that's not what we call them now, but like, that's what was going on. And so that was surprising. I didn't know that children that young could be hospitalized for their behavior. So anyway, that was like the most surprising part of working there, is just seeing like how young some of these kids were that were being hospitalized for behavior. You know, whether they really needed to be there or not, I don't know. That really wasn't my call, but it was really sad. Yeah, I think it would probably be helpful if I shared a little more detail just so you get the idea, especially if you want to work in a place like this. Like, I'll just give you a little bit more of a an idea of like the different roles in a place like that and how they interact with each other, and then how they interact with the children who are there. As far as like the therapeutic positions, like day to day on the floor with the kids, managing behaviors and helping, there were therapists and psychologists. So they would do like the individual sessions with the kids, and they would do like talk therapy groups with the kids. There were nurses who were doing like medication management, so giving out the, normal everyday meds. We had one kid while I was there who had like a feeding tube, so the nurse obviously managed that. So any medical issues that some of the kids might have had. And then they also were responsible, like if there was an emergency behavioral situation, the nurses were responsible for getting like a shot ready, basically to give medication to calm this, the patient down. So that was the nurses. I think they also monitored like how much the kids were eating and stuff like that, because some of our patients had like eating disorders, and so that was another responsibility of the nurses. And then the psychiatrists, of course, like there were several psychiatrists who would evaluate each patient. They would evaluate if they were already on medications, like what was going on with those medications. They would also be in charge of prescribing new medications and monitoring, if those were working or not working. And then they were just in charge of like the medication part of patient stay at the hospital. And they were also the ones who ultimately gave the sign off, like, yes, this person can go home, or no, they need to stay, or, hey, maybe we need to look at an alternative placement for them so that they can get help longer term. Like maybe they're never going to be ready to go home. Like maybe they need a higher level of care long term. So that was up to the psychiatrist and the psychologist. They worked together with the therapist to make those decisions. And then the behavioral techs were like probably the most important people on the units. Those were the people who were with these kids 24/7. They were the ones who were there, for 8 to 12 hour shifts every day, supervising meals, supervising activities, making sure that we as the therapists were safe when we came in to do our groups. So those were the people that you really had to make good relationships with quickly, because if they didn't have your back, you could be in danger. Like, honestly, you could be at risk of getting hurt, because some of these teenagers particularly could really do some damage if they decided. Yeah, and just a little aside, like I was probably about 25 when I started there, or when I was working there. And I just remember being in a room full of teenage boys who were all larger than me. Like they all were taller than me. Most of them weighed more than I did at the time. And I just remember thinking, like, if any one of these kids decided to act out and like make a move, I would be toast, right? So I was just grateful for the techs who worked there, because they really set the tone and kind of kept people in line and kept the expectations set and like everything managed. I don't know how it is going today in 2024. This was a really long time ago. I think kids were different then, like behavior was different then. There was really not social media on the level that there is now. I can't even imagine what it would be like to work in a psychiatric hospital present day. I don't know what it would be like in the milieu to have like what the techs are dealing with. I don't know, but I know that back then, like those techs were hardcore, they were serious, like they meant business, and most of the kids respected them. So that's that. I will say, like, physically nothing bad happened to me when I was working there. I was there for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years, I think. But we would hear stories. There were definitely, situations that had happened on site, and there were definitely times when the unit would have to go on lockdown, which meant like everyone either had to stay where they were because there was something going on in another area of the hospital, or if something was like going down in the room you were in, that meant everyone else had to leave, except for like the person who was in crisis and, the people who were handling that. I did have to get trained in CPI. I think that was crisis prevention intervention. I don't know what it stood for, but CPI, I had to get trained in that, which is just a way to safely and therapeutically put other humans in a restraint without hurting them. So all of us who worked there had to know how to do that in an emergency. There were different holds for smaller children that you could do by yourself if you had to, and then there were other positions and techniques that you would do like in a team, so with like 2 to 4 other people, which unfortunately was necessary sometimes. Like it was just something that happened when these kids would just sort of reach their limit and lose control of themselves. I will say, like, I think for some of these teenagers and children, I do think that getting into a restraint situation was like almost fulfilling a need for them, like a need for physical touch, a need to be held, a need for affection, like as weird as that sounds, because you weren't really allowed to touch in the hospital. Like I wasn't allowed to give the kids hugs. Like the most we could really do is like a high five. And so for some of these teenagers and children, like if they were hospitalized for an extended period of time, sorry, I'm gonna cry. Like if they were in the hospital for a long time, like they just didn't get any hugs. Like they never got any physical affection. They never had like an opportunity to be shown the type of normal care that a kid should have. And so in some of these outburst situations, I think subconsciously, like, they were just looking for an external boundary and to be held. And the only way that they could go for that was to get this like extreme acting out situation to where the adults had to physically intervene. I'm not saying that was the case for all of them, but if I, like, as a clinician, I'm thinking about like how every behavior is expressing an unmet need, like, that's my best analysis for how that went down a lot of the time. So yeah, that's just really sad thinking about that. I haven't thought about that in a really long time. Okay, let's move on. Yeah, I think I was gonna talk about like quiet rooms and, you know, kids. I can just talk about it briefly. There are things called quiet rooms where the walls are padded. Some of them have like, it almost looks like an operating table or like a dentist chair in the middle. And they have like soft padded restraints that would go around the wrists and ankles. I'm sorry, I haven't thought about this in so many years. But yeah, so they would have restraints around the wrists and the ankles. And if the kid was particularly upset and trying to spit, then the staff members would wear like face mat, like guards, like these plastic guards on their faces to prevent themselves from getting spit on in the face. But obviously that's only if they had time to sort of gear up before they attempted to restrain somebody. Sometimes they had time to anticipate that and do that, and sometimes they didn't. And I think the reason I'm crying is just like thinking about how much trauma was there in those rooms, and like for these kids, and it wasn't their fault, right? Like, they weren't bad kids, they weren't evil, there wasn't anything fundamentally wrong with them. I mean, some of them maybe. But overall, like, honestly, in general, these were really smart, funny, intelligent humans that just had a really shitty life. And a lot of them came from really harsh trauma histories. And I think that honestly is my biggest takeaway from working in a behavioral health hospital. You know, you think about a psych hospital, right? Like, if you've never been to one or you've never worked in one, you think about a mental hospital or a psych hospital, behavioral, whatever you want to call it. But you think about a place like that, and it's easy, like in, you know, in the movies, you think about the people there, like they're some crazy psychopath, or they're, you know, all a bunch of, you know, people who are out of touch with reality, or they're, you know, just out of their minds, right? And you don't really think about the humanity of the people who are there. And so just thinking back about these kids and thinking back to like the individuals that I worked with, and a lot of them were like repeat clients, I guess, like we used to call them frequent flyers. They would just come over and over and over again. Like, they would find themselves hospitalized multiple times a year. there were some kids, like I said, I was only there a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and there were some kids, like, I still remember their name, I still remember their face, I still remember like what their story was, and it's been, what, 14 years now, 13 years, because they were just there so often. Like, you can't forget. So yeah, so just thinking about these people, as humans, and as humans just who have endured things that no one should even think about, should even know about, should even hear about, like unspeakable things that I will never be able to say on a YouTube video, like that these kids experienced. You know, I watch true crime shows and I watch those channels on YouTube, and sometimes you hear like, you know, stories of things that adults have done to children. And everyone gets so upset. Oh, that's the worst thing I've ever heard. But unfortunately, like, I've heard way worse, and you don't see those things on the news because, you know, the kids lived, right? You don't see those cases on the news very often, but there are some really depraved, awful adults in this world, and they hurt the kids who are closest to them, and it's really disgusting. So anyway, I'm really sorry. That was a huge tangent, and this video is probably super long, but if you're still here, thanks for continuing to watch. I think it's important that you know this before going into it. I had no idea how impactful it would be for me as a human. I think when we go into helping professions as counselors or social workers or, you know, whatever the case may be, I think it's easy to think that you're going to save everybody. And I think it's easy to think that everyone is savable. I think it's easy to, you know, when I went into school for counseling, I was like, I want to help the children, you know, because I like kids. Who doesn't like kids? Well, there's people who don't like kids, obviously, but I innocently thought, like, I like children. I would like to help children, right? But the more that I worked with children in these severe circumstances, like the inpatient behavioral health hospital, the more I realized that some of these children are not savable. And if they are savable, I myself am probably not going to be the one person that, you know, changes their life or fixes their situation. Because the reality was they would come into the hospital for a period of time, and then eventually they needed to go back home or into the foster home that they were living in, or into a different foster home, or into a residential treatment center, or juvenile hall, or wherever the heck they were supposed to go, and continue to be exposed to whatever it was that was contributing to their initial trauma and problem. So I think that was the most frustrating and disheartening thing to realize, is that you cannot save them all. And really, you cannot save any of them by yourself, because the system is broken. So good luck. No, I'm just kidding. It doesn't mean that it's not worth it, right? It doesn't mean that it's not worth it. It is worth it to do the work. It is worth it to show up. It is worth it to be maybe like the one kind person who's patient with them in their world of constantly being yelled at or nitpicked or put down. That is worth it. If you can give them some reprieve and some kindness and some hope while you have time with them. But yeah, I think it just really shifted my understanding of humanity. It shifted my understanding of what my role was and what my responsibility was. And it also definitely showed me what I did and did not want to take on in my career. Because that, like, hearing about trauma after trauma after trauma every single day at work, and losing a couple of our patients after they had been discharged, like finding out that they had passed away, because, you know, they had basically convinced the psychiatrist that they were better, and then they really had their plan of what they were going to do. Yeah, just experiencing that from the clinician side was really difficult and showed me that that was not the area of service that I wanted to work in for the rest of my career. So that was my experience. Sorry for ending on such a horrific note. I don't think I mean, I took notes, right? But I don't think I expected to kind of get that deep into it. Yeah, but it was really difficult. I will say, I will give a positive memory maybe to end on, because I do think it's important that there are people who are willing to work in those places. I know one of my good friends that I worked with at a different job, she loved that population. Like, the tougher the kid or the, you know, more trauma they had, like, the more she wanted to work with them. So that was her population. So if you are somebody who has a heart for that and you can handle that, please don't let my story like deter you from trying it out, seeing if it's a good fit for you. I believe every clinician has a population that's for them, and not every population is for everyone. And I don't think we should think that everyone should be able to handle everything, because it's just not true. But yeah, this might be your population. I'm just sharing my experience. For me, this was a tough one. But let me end by sharing my favorite memory as an expressive arts therapist at the inpatient behavioral hospital. It was leading a dance therapy group that just clicked. I mean, those moments were so rare when you would have everyone's attention. They were all buying into what I was asking. And this particular group that I'm thinking of was kind of like the tween age. They were from like, I don't know, 9 to 12, 8 to 12. So they all understood what I was asking. I asked them to make up a dance. So each kid, there were probably about 10 kids, each kid pulled a word out of a bowl, and they had to make up a movement that went with that word. So like one word might have been like twist. So, you know, the kid might have done one of these. Another word might have been rise. So maybe they're rising like this. Another one, I don't know, whatever. It doesn't matter what the words were. The point is, every kid had a word. And they each got into these little groups and they put their words together. And so every kid was learning the moves that each other were making up. So, you know, they would do twist and rise and reach. And they were doing it. They were all agreeing. They were all on board. They were all working together. And then I had them do it to like kind of a fast song. So they were silly and having fun and doing their dance to a fast song. And then I put on Jordan Sparks. I put on No Air. And I'm gonna cry again. I'm sorry, I'm crying like 3 times in this video. But I put that song on. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's old. I'm old. I don't care. But I put that song on. And the way that these kids expressed and slowed their bodies down were just in the moment, like just feeling the song and feeling their bodies and feeling the movement. It was so beautiful. And I was so proud of them. And they wanted to do it again and again and again. And so I let them do it like as many times as they wanted in a row, because that was like their dance that they made, and that was their song for their dance. And it was just really beautiful. And I don't know if any of them will ever remember that, or if it had like an impact on them, or if it helped them in any way, but I would like to think that it helped in that moment for them to just sort of like step outside of their problems and step outside of their fear and their anger and their sadness, and just like have a few minutes of being a kid and having some normalcy and having a little bit of fun and just being proud of something that they created in the midst of all of the chaos. So that's my happy story. So that's my happy story. That's my like proud therapy, expressive arts therapy moment. Yeah, that's something I'm really proud of. So overall, I would say that I'm really grateful for the opportunity I had to work with those kids. I'm grateful for everything I learned in those early years as a brand new therapist. But it was really hard. Like, and as you can see, again, 14 years later, it has an impact on me. And I think if I had kept going in that particular environment, I think it would have broken me. So I would say, again, there are people, like, we need people to work in those places. We need good people with good hearts to work in those places, because those patients need somebody who cares and somebody who's not jaded and burnt out and angry. But just be forewarned, like, it is tough. It's tough. It's tough to hear and see the things that you hear and see in those places. But if you are going in there, it is worth it. You are going to have an impact on these people, whether you're going to work with kids or adults. And you could be the one kind patient person that they meet while they're there. So if you have the opportunity to be patient and kind with them, please do it, because you have no idea what they're going through. And it's important. So thank you for watching. Sorry for all the crying. I guess I'm glad I made this video. This wasn't the way I expected it to go, but I'm glad I shared, and I hope it was helpful for you. And if you have any questions, or if you'd like to see more information about what it was like working there, or I probably, I want to shy away from sharing specific patient stories just because that's their story and not mine to share. But if you have any questions or whatever, or if you have been on the other side of being in an inpatient behavioral hospital, feel free to let me know. I'm so sorry too, because I know that those experiences can be very difficult on the other side. So yeah, I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to talking with you soon.